Look, we all cherish the ability to be heard, whether it be expressing our opinions through our everyday conversations or online digital interactions. Having a voice empowers us. The same principles are employed on a grander scale by today's media giants through print, TV, radio, and online media. Thing is, as entertainment and information has evolved, we've seen independent media struggle to keep up. With a few independent media outlets being the exception and having grown to near giant status, the bulk of these unfiltered, raw, and seemingly transparent publications have faded into the sunset. So, where have they gone and who's responsible? And in this day and age, do we truly have a balanced, unbiased source for accurate information? Hey Calgary, I'm Kevin Chorney. I'm joined tonight by Darren Krause, the managing editor at Metro Calgary, as well as Lucas Meyer from 660 News, and Taylor Lambert, journalist, founder of the Calgarian. Gentlemen, thank you all for being here, making the time. If you would, real quick, Darren, maybe tell me about your role at Metro and just what's going on at Metro nowadays.
Sure, absolutely. I've been there for 9 years. Started off as just a freelance reporter way back when we first started up. Made my way up to managing editor. Been a part of real growth in the local news scene. I know we're going to be talking a little bit about the state of the media landscape here, and I like to think that we've become a pretty reputable source of news here for Calgarians.
Hard to argue that. Thanks for taking the time
You
for
bet.
being here. Lucas, you're a busy guy. I'm aware of that. The 660 News, as well as other things. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Full-time reporter at 660 News, mostly reporting, a little bit of anchoring, a little bit of sports and traffic, a little bit of producing as well. But also since last November, been a contributor to Sportsnet, and also the play-by-play voice, my first passion, of the University of Calgary Dinos, and been doing play-by-play since 2004, all the way back to my undergraduate days at St. FX in Antigonish, Nova Scotia.
Good shout out. Nice job. Nice job. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
And if you would, Taylor, same question. How about yourself? What are you up to?
I've been a freelancer for several years and independently published several books. Lately, I have recently launched a project to get a crowd-funded independent media platform off the ground here in Calgary. It's in the middle of a Kickstarter right now, and I'm looking for funding from the public.
And I want to hear maybe a little bit more about this. So the publication is called The Calgarian.
Yes.
Right, and you're focused on hyper-local news, is that correct? Or just more of a Calgary opinion to take on things?
Well, basically what it would be is myself and another reporter working full-time, somebody I would hire, and then there would be a modest freelance budget as well, and the focus would be entirely local.
Cool.
You could think of it sort of like an online magazine focused on Calgary. It would be $6,000 a month, which is very modest budget, very, very modest salaries for everybody involved.
Yeah.
And right now the Kickstarter is looking for 2 months of funding for that to get it off the ground, so it's $12,000. It's halfway through the Kickstarter and we're at about $4,000, so there's quite a lot of people who are willing to put up money for this.
And there should be interest. You know, people should have interest in these things. Now, I want to maybe give you the opportunity, because I think this is important. Where can people go to donate for the Kickstarter?
To find out about the Kickstarter and to pledge some money to it, go to thecalgarian.ca.
Okay.
There's a video there. There's all the breakdown of the project and how it works is there, as well as a link to my personal website, so you can look into my background in journalism, what I've done, my qualifications for doing this.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
All right, Darren, maybe I'll start with you. I mean, newspaper ownership is essentially a four-slice pie of ownership across Canada. Why is that? How do we get here, and really, how does that affect our lives, do you think?
You know what, you've asked a big question. There really is no simple answer. It could be the subject of a thesis paper at a university on journalism. It's probably a combination of factors. Probably underlying everything is the fact that ultimately the industry, whether it's radio, TV, or print, hasn't really stayed with the advance in technology. I wouldn't blame internet by any means for all of our downfall, but ultimately just the reluctance to change, the reluctance to shift, thinking that everything would be like the heyday of the 70s where the newsrooms were aplenty and resources were everywhere. We just don't have that luxury anymore, and yet we still kind of think that we should deliver news the same way. So we kind of got ourselves behind the 8 ball, and it's it's resulted in fewer voices, fewer perspectives, and I think ultimately that's a disservice to Canadians.
Is it dangerous then, Taylor, to have fewer publications, fewer voices?
Absolutely.
Where does that leave us?
In terms of local journalism, I mean, you can think of 5-10 years ago, even in January, there were more journalists working in Calgary than there are today. The city is not less complex, it is not smaller, it is bigger, it is more complex. It is also more diverse. So I do think that when you have fewer journalists covering more stories, it's inevitable that there's going to be stories that fall through the cracks. And I think you also need to have a wide range of diversity in the voices conveying those stories.
Yeah, certainly. Would you agree, Lucas?
Well, certainly. I think that there is, and a little bit more to Darren's point about the changing kind of technological landscape, on top of the fact that the way that we consume news has changed so much from even 10 years ago. Like Darren said, he's been there for 9 years. I find that the other issue is how do traditional media find ways to monetize the new way that we consume information now. And I think that that's been, obviously, in the end, we say it a lot of media, that money talks. And so how do you find a way to capitalize on how people are consuming things on Twitter, how people are sharing things on Facebook, and just how quickly news and information can change, I think is another, very, very fascinating kind of look at the future over the next 5 to 10 years. I wouldn't be surprised, for example, if in 5 years or so that established reporters, their tweets are going to be advertised, or there'll be some sort of advertisement behind that particular tweet. And I like that's just kind of one.
That sickens me.
I know. It's kind of a scary idea, but it just wouldn't surprise me if that is a route that certain producers of media or news might take, because because obviously the whole financial aspect of the way the journalism is changing is certainly a challenge.
The one thing that worries me about that though is we're getting to that point. We perhaps never should have got to that point. And if you go back to the mentality, how we refuse to shift, we should have been thinking about how to monetize mobile, how to monetize the internet. 10 years ago, when the first smartphone came out, we should have started thinking, hey, this is going to be the future. But nobody did.
It's hard to deny that it seems like we're playing a lot of catch up.
Yeah,
in a lot of facets. Folks, we're going to take a quick break and check in with our rant pack. Stay with us.
I feel like our media situation here in Canada is in crisis. Granted, there are a lot of grassroots organizations that are popping up, but a lot of these organizations are not, let's say, credible or aren't being held to account. I mean, we had the issue with the current Alberta government that refused to let certain reporters into the legislature to witness something or other, and it just created a big backlash against the government. The thing is, I don't consider these people reporters. The person who is the head of this organization seems to think that himself isn't a reporter. I feel like that's the problem with, or that is a major problem with our current media situation, and the fact that the big groups are controlled by a very narrow group of minds with, I mean, granted, they're regulated by the CRTC, but not to the degree that they should be.